Hello and welcome back to El Partido, yet another Spanish football podcast. But as always, with a little twist. And it's an exciting night in Madrid. It's a European night once again. However, we're not focusing on Atleti versus Arsenal. We're not focusing on the Galacticos of Real Madrid. No, we are heading to the Barrio of Vallecas to speak about the one and only Rayo Vallecano and to dispel some horrible myths and rumours we've seen today. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by my co-host Paul once again. Paul, how are you doing?
I'm doing very well, Nick. I'm glad to be here. It's there's quite a lot to get through here. This I would say we don't usually do episodes where we are in a way reacting to current affairs, but we're not reacting to current affairs on the football pitch as such. We're kind of reacting a little bit to current affairs, and this is terrible. This on social media. This misconception that we've seen today. We're trying to right a wrong, aren't we?
We well and truly are on this point, and the point that Paul is alluding to is we saw a mass amount of, I don't want to call them bots. They're not bots, but they're bot-esque, aren't they, in terms of their approach?
Yeah.
And they stick crap out all the time, don't they? And half of it's fact, half of it's complete fabrication. And the one this morning, Paul, it was an absolute honk, wasn't it?
Oh, it was, and it got liked and shared and reshared by accounts with large followings, and so the misinformation grows legs, doesn't it? And people start. That's the world we live in now. We're here to debunk misinformation only in Spanish football, and our qualifications are nothing except for passion and devotion, and what do you call it? Just disgruntled male feelings towards football, I guess.
Yeah, a bit like Angry Man Shouts at Cloud article in The Simpsons, isn't it? Where I think we just see things like this and we go, I think we're of an age as well where we're just going, it takes 2 minutes just to double check that. You can go to, the fact in question is that someone with an account that has got 684,000 followers said that this was Rayo Vallecano's debut season in a major European trophy. And I just kind of saw that as a red rag to a bull this morning. I was like, are you for real? Are we just completely forgetting that, in 2001, they reached the quarterfinals of the UEFA Cup, which at the time, dare I say, Paul, no disrespect to the Conference League, but the UEFA Cup was the second tier European trophy compared to the third tier that they're in now.
Yeah,
a much more major achievement, and in a year which was, absolutely brilliant for Spanish football clubs as well. And it just, it pissed me off something absolutely royal. And then, like you see the other people going, "Oh, isn't it great that they got here for in their debut season? And what a club! I hope they win." And it's just like, get in the bin. It's not about that. It's about the truth, and we're here to tell people the truth today, aren't we?
Absolutely, yeah, and you're right. First of all, I completely agree. I think the UEFA Cup. I know that the UEFA categorized the history of the UEFA Cup as being like, part of the Europa Leagues, but the separate competitions. The Europa League replaced the UEFA Cup. It's not a continuity competition, is it? No. And obviously, the Conference League is the third tier of it. So. That's correct. And I suppose as well, apart from the fact that it was factually inaccurate that we saw being, this post being shared by people who should know better, I was also a little bit bugged to see that there was people who were so young that they didn't even know that they don't remember that there was football as early as the 2000s. I was like, oh God, I'm old now. But anyway, we are here to right some wrongs.
Yeah, we really are, because, like you say, that there is something to be understated about, like you say, Rayo Vallecano as a club for one. We spoke with Paul Reedy, in our episode "Struck by Lightning," where we spoke about Rayo Vallecano as a club, its history, its roots as a working class club in the centre of a very working class part of the capital city, and obviously all the furore that goes around it, such as the president, who is an absolute arsehole. The having to queue for tickets, the training ground, the pitch being terrible, the facilities, not being up to scratch for the Liga side. But essentially, it is always, the fans being there through thick and thin, them succeeding in spite of all the things that go in against them. You think about, imagine where Rayo Vallecano could be if it was being done properly. And this part of it is again part of the mystery, the story, the legend of Rayo Vallecano in terms of when they first qualified for Europe, not in 2025, like some would have you believe, but all the way back in 2000 at the turn of the century. It was an incredible story for a team that were only just promoted to La Liga, had finished ninth in La Liga that season, but had got into the UEFA Cup through the newly established UEFA Fair Play competition, which I don't think they really do that anymore, or I certainly haven't seen much of it, but it was such a big reward for basically just being good.
Yeah, it was the Fair Play Award. So if I remember this correctly, and I'm basing it on the fact that I can remember two occasions when Manchester City reached European competition through this scheme, and I can also remember when Fulham reached the final against Atleti. Fulham had only qualified for the competition via this route, so the Fair Play. So for anybody who, as we've established, there are people who are younger than us nowadays. Anybody who's not old enough to remember or has just merely forgotten. Essentially, the Fair Play route was based on. It wasn't really a coefficient of like yellow cards, but it was across the leagues in Europe. The club which finished the highest in its domestic league, but outside of the qualification places, with the least amount of disciplinary points recorded against it. So that was number of yellow cards and red cards in its domestic league, which actually, when you explain it now in 2026, it does sound a bit wacky, but it was a good routine. I mean, it helped me tick off the Millennium Stadium in Cardiff by going to see City play against TNS, or the New Saints, as I think they're called nowadays. Which all right, it was in Wales, but it's still a European fixture, a European away day, which I was 13 at the time, I think. 13. So
they all count.
I'm counting that. You're counting that first European away day at 13 years old. So yes, that's how it was. It was a case of if you were well disciplined in your league, you were rewarded by UEFA by being given an invitation into the UEFA Cup, which is what happened to Rayo in 2000 to 2001 season, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So
and
we need to fill in a bit more than that, don't we?
Yeah, because like we say, this was not a strange Rayo club, but Rayo have always been sort of like the club that has not the Galacticos. They never well and truly had sort of like the top players. Occasionally in the last few years we've seen Asian stars like Radamel Falcao and James Rodriguez play for the Madrid club, but they were kind of you were speaking about Fulham before, kind of like a cluster team of just all right footballers, some, no world beaters, but what they had was a mentality of we're Rayo. This is how we do things, and they have a great squad cohesion. And at the time, they'd been promoted into La Liga from the Spanish Segunda. They had Juan de Ramos as the manager. So, again, if you're old like us, you remember him from Rayo. You'll also remember him. He went to Sevilla to help them win their first UEFA Cup, which then became sort of the Europa League, the first of 7, and then also became the Tottenham manager, the Spurs manager
Yes.
after or before Martin Jol. I can't quite remember which way around it was. Definitely before.
Well, he
Harry
was the
Redknapp.
last Spurs manager to win a trophy up until Ange Postecoglou won the
Big Ange.
Conference League, last season. So, and he won the League Cup with Spurs in, was it January or February of 2008, and then was rewarded by being poached by Real Madrid.
Yes, he was.
That year as well.
I forget he went to Real Madrid. That's like proper in the archive of our brains. That one, isn't it? He must have been slipped in between Capello and Schuster, I'm going to say, or maybe just after Schuster.
2007 to 2008. So because when did Capello become the England manager?
Capello was after the Wally with the Brolly episode, wasn't it? So after McLaren, that's when Capello came in.
McLaren failed to get England to the Euros in 2008. So that would be the summer of 2008. He gets sacked. So Capello, So he came
around
in
that time.
after Capello.
You were spot on.
There we go.
Exactly.
And you think as well, actually, because obviously Juan de Ramos is someone who, those of us of an age will remember him. However, after his stint at Real Madrid, he goes to CSKA Moscow for a brief stint, and then ends up at Dnipro. The second name is also begins Dnipro. Dnipropetrovsk, I think. Is that how you say it?
I think I know what you mean. In Ukraine, isn't it?
Yeah, Ukrainian club. Yeah, I probably mispronounced it. I do apologize. And then
we're a Spanish football podcast.
And then he does have a spell back at Malaga, but it's only a brief one in about probably about 10 years ago now, about 2016. I'm going to check. I'm going to do something we don't usually do, and that is fact check.
Fact check Juan de Ramos at a time. Well, whilst you're doing that, I'll also regale the listeners on some of the other players who, when you look back at this squad, we do say it's kind of like a bit of a mixture of kind of like, I don't want to say journeymen, but sort of like just solid old football players. And you look at Luis Sembranos, the creative player. You've got Michel Sanchez, John Bolo, Elvir Bolic, Jesus Cota, a youngish Julian Lopetegui as well as a backup goalkeeper. Do you know who was the backup keeper too, Paul? Dare I test your knowledge on this?
I know it was Casey Keller.
Casey Keller, the man from Seattle, if I remember rightly, who again tedious link to I think Fulham and Spurs, if I remember rightly. That's going to test.
Definitely
my
brain, was at Spurs. He was at Fulham. Was he at Fulham 2008? Oh, it was just before there.
Might have been, yeah.
Cup run, wasn't it? He was at Leicester in the 90s.
That might be the one I'm thinking of as well. And then he had a couple of German clubs as well, if I remember rightly, didn't he? I think he was at what are they called?
Gladbach? Was it Gladbach or was it?
I think he was. Borussia Mönchengladbach. Yeah, and then I think he was also at it's got a bloody Hanover. I think he was with them as well, if I remember rightly. But yeah, so absolute legend that came across from America, and I always forget that he played in Spain for Rayo. Until you look back at this season.
Yeah, and I just want to confirm. Yes, Juan de Ramos, Malaga, 2003, 2004, Sevilla, Tottenham, Real Madrid, CSKA Moscow, like I said, and then it was Dnipropetrovsk. Second time saying it, still got it wrong. Up until 2014, and then his last job was a stint at Malaga, and he's not, according to Transfermarkt, he's not been a coach since. So,
well, if you've got Dnipro, that place, money.
Well, if you look at his managerial career in reverse. He starts at Malaga, he goes, learns a bit more of his trade in Ukraine, moves up to Moscow, then goes to Real Madrid, and you think, that's where things start to take off, but then he ends up at Spurs. But he regales himself by going to Sevilla and back at Malaga, Espanyol, Betis, and then lands at Rayo. I mean, there's a few clubs after that, like Lleida, Barcelona B, Logroñés, Levante. Okay, yeah. So even if you reverse his career, it's not really.
It's not great.
No.
He has a good core years, doesn't he? That's probably what we need to focus on here. He's good. He's good solid years. Is the way you go, and I think that especially with Rayo. Again, he was a very pragmatic manager who I think that suited Rayo Vallecano at the time because, like we've just reiterated, they had a squad which wasn't built on superstars. It was built on good, sturdy players who you can get that extra 10% out of if you need to. And I think that was very much proved in the European campaign that they went on because they didn't go out and buy, a loads of, big stars to compete. You remember at the time we've also got Celta Vigo in the Europa League, not Europa League, sorry, UEFA Cup at the same time. You've got Deportivo Alaves. And, in the case of Celta, they went out and bought a few, decent, pretty decent football players for that kind of money. Benny McCarthy, they had a young Claude Makaleli, etc. So they'd invested to have a decent European campaign. Where I think Rayo basically just turned up in, with the shirts on the back and went, "Let's just see what happens, lads." And it's a great story as well because again, looking at the UEFA Cup in its isolation, it isn't like the Europa League is now with the league format, or even before that they had the groups. It was just purely knockout football, wasn't it?
It was, yes, and I think it's worthwhile actually just naming some of the clubs that were in this competition this particular season. So, and bearing in mind this is the UEFA Cup, not the Champions League. Bayer Leverkusen, Barcelona, Feyenoord, Stuttgart, Shakhtar Donetsk, Celta Vigo, Espanyol, Porto, Roma, Hamburg, Liverpool, Deportivo Alaves, Hertha Berlin, Internazionale, Milan, Rayo, obviously, Werder Bremen, Rangers, PSV Eindhoven, PAOK in Greece, Parma, OG Parma from Italy. Actually, no, whether that was still the original Parma, wasn't it, back then? And then you had 1860 Munich, and Club Bruges. Some of these names are clubs that you would expect to be in the Champions League. I mean, obviously Barcelona, and this particular season we were obviously spoilt by having so many Spanish teams in the competition. I can't believe I've just missed off naming Kaiserslautern as well, and they were in the competition along with Bordeaux. I say that because if anybody wants to go to a football match in Germany that's outside of the top tier, highly recommend going to a match at the Beerza and seeing Kaiserslautern. Incredible atmosphere, incredible stadium. Anyway, back to this. So yeah, we were treated with the likes of Rayo, Alaves, Barcelona, Celta Vigo, all in this UEFA Cup competition together. And you know what? Celta Vigo beat Stuttgart in the fourth round. Barcelona beat AEK Athens. And we had an all-Spanish quarter-final of Celta versus Barcelona.
I think after that
we'll get on to back to Rayo in a moment.
Yeah, we had an all-Spanish semi-final as well, didn't we? There was that Celta against Alaves, wasn't it? And then it was Alaves who reached the final against.
Well, it was Alaves versus Rayo, which obviously we're going to cover in the other quarterfinal, and then it became Alaves versus Kaiserslautern and Liverpool versus Barcelona.
Ah, right. Is that what it was?
Yeah,
I must have dreamt that Celta Vigo did better than I thought then. But
no, Barcelona knocked them out in the quarters.
Bloody Barcelona! Every single time, they just have to ruin everything, don't they?
I think it was an away goal. Let me double check.
Oh, away goals. Can we bring that back?
It was on the away goals rule. That was the only way that Barcelona overcame the mighty Euro Celta at the time.
Oh, definitely. Well, like I say, bring it back, please. Seferin, isn't he, who's in charge of UEFA nowadays? So bring it back.
Yeah.
But for Rayo itself, obviously they come through the fair play route, which means they don't automatically get seeded into the competition. They've got to go through the qualifying rounds. Safe to say, against Constellation Esportiva, which is a club from Andorra, if I remember rightly. Over 2 legs, beating them 16-0. Pretty comprehensive result there for the Madrid side, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably one of them where, like, you look at it and you think, oh, it was a close call. That maybe we need an extra couple of goals just to seal the tie, really. But yeah, excellent aggregate score.
I think it was 10-0 at home. It was, if I remember rightly.
Yeah.
Which I think.
Well, that's the thing. That's how football used to be, wasn't it? Was you just keep going until you've run out of goals. Don't sit back after going 1-0 up. Arsenal or some of these clubs nowadays.
Nudge, 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 nudge. But yeah, no, that's exactly what it was. Because again, even though they were facing, and this is no disrespect to Andorran football, but it is a small micronation, pocketed in between France and Spain in the Pyrenees. Not a footballing powerhouse. So again, it's the kind of result you'd expect. And Rayo obviously just wanting to definitely confirm their participation in a European campaign. And that must have been the exciting thing for them going into that match, is despite the opposition, this was the UEFA Cup at Vallecas. It's probably something that, a lot of Rayo Vallecano fans probably wouldn't have expected to have seen in their lifetime, never mind twice or 3 times as we've seen it now. So a very, surreal beginning, arriving in Europe in a very, very overwhelming fashion, get through to the first round where then they play a bit more European prestige, won't they? And they come up against Molde, which is Sweden, isn't it, if I remember rightly?
Well, Molde are one of the oldest and would you say I almost came out with an Americanism there, most winningest, but one of the powerhouses of Scandinavian football from the 20th century. I mean, it was Brian Clough's Nottingham Forest that faced Molde, wasn't it? Was it the second European Cup final that they won? It was the one where Trevor Francis played, and I think Brian Clough said afterwards that he didn't play very well. He only played because other people were injured or something like that.
Yeah, I think it was 1988, wasn't it? If I remember rightly. I'm trying to think back to the damned
United.
No,
it wasn't 88. It was got to be earlier than that.
Do you reckon?
I think
might be
earlier than that.
Yeah. Might be adding a few years onto his age then, really. I remember him having Stuart Pearce and the story. I don't know if you remember the story about the iron. We've really gone off on a tangent here if we're going on to Brian Clough stories. But yeah, that's a fun one if you want to go and find it. But yeah, you are right. Molde are definitely a powerhouse of not just Scandinavian football, of European football. Again, the starting place of, many a brilliant Swedish footballer, including the likes of, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, for example.
Norwegian club.
Norwegian club, sorry, beg my pardon.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah.
Ole Gunnar Solskjaer, I think, obviously has a long-term association with Molde, if I remember rightly.
Yeah, is that where he started his managerial career as well before he ended up
at
Manchester United, when he took the wheel there?
Absolutely. And again, a result here is, really, really interesting. A 1-1 draw in the first leg, but then a courageous 1-0 victory in the second leg means that they, move on to the second round. And again, with UEFA Cup, when you start to get these kind of results against, pretty decent teams that you don't come up against every single week in La Liga or in Spanish Segunda, you do start to enjoy the spectacle. So they come up into the second round against FF Viborg, which again, I'm really testing my football knowledge here. I'm gonna say Denmark with the Viborg part of it, but I might be wrong on that front. This is a big turning point for Rayo because they do almost go out here, don't they? In terms of, they win the first leg by 1-0, but they lose the second leg by 2-1, and that is away from home, which
our
means
old friend the
away goals rule,
the away goals again.
Yeah. So, grazing with or dicing with death, so to speak, in this competition, the fact that you get through and you scrape through gives them a real sort of alert to how vulnerable you can be in a European competition, can't you, when it is knockout?
Yeah, absolutely. It, and this is a time as well where there was less of a financial gap between leagues as well. So the arguably the talent was more evenly spread across the clubs throughout the continent.
Mm,
One might say. And so yeah, games were tightly contested, and you couldn't take as much risk because you didn't want to expose yourself in a home game and give the opposition an away goal that would count, effectively double in some cases. So it was a different dynamic to what we see currently. I mean, it's not that long ago that we did have the away goals, well, but I felt like in more recent years, the score lines were more extreme. And again, it's probably because of the imbalance between leagues, where it felt like away goals as a rule came into play less frequently. I would say, certainly in the last,
mm.
5 to 10 years versus the 5 to 10 years before that. Or maybe that's just me with, not quite a Mandela effect, but like, it's one of
Yeah,
those
yeah.
sort of perceptions that I have through my experience of watching football.
Well, the away goals rule, which, again, a lot of people now say, and this is how football started to condition people in terms of their attitudes and their opinions, is they'll say, oh, well, without away goal rules, people just pull the handbrake off and they go for it. I.e., you look at, the game we saw between PSG and Munich the other night, for example. Not necessarily the case for me, because I thought away goals added a real sense of jeopardy, because if someone came and just scored that one away goal, it turned a tie on its head and added like a franticness, especially in the second leg. Even in the
Mm,
first leg, to be fair, if a team came away and got an away goal, you knew that you had to score two at home. You
yeah,
had to better that result, because you knew that at that point you can't score an away goal.
yeah,
That's just the fact of the matter. So and especially if it was scored during a second leg, I am thinking of Liverpool Chelsea, if I remember right. I think Liverpool scored that sort of like last minute away goal at Stamford Bridge in the first leg, and they just knew that they had to um, equal or better, obviously, Chelsea's result at Anfield. And it's stories like that that then added that extra layer of jeopardy, and that's what's happened here with Rayo as well. They were looking at going out at this point in the competition. It was 2-1 on aggregate. And they're thinking, Christ, this isn't going to do us great here. We've got the results at home, but we're away in Denmark. It's probably bloody freezing. We're struggling
mm,
a little bit. But I tell you what, if we can get that little glimmer of hope and get a goal, it completely changes the tie, because they know full well that Viborg didn't score at Vallecas. And I think that's where the sort of like belief comes in for Rayo that
mm,
actually, you know what, we belong here. We're in this competition. And if we can win here, and we can win at Mulder, we can win anywhere.
yeah.
And the old cliche, dare I say, Paul, can they do it on a cold, rainy night in Stoke on a Tuesday? Can they do it on a cold Wednesday night in the far, the deep east, so to speak? Russia, Moscow. It's a different story, isn't it?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Yeah. And if I remember correctly, at this point in time as well, this was before artificial pitches were really permitted by UEFA as well. So, yeah, to go to Moscow for the next round against Lokomotiv, there's a prospect there. It's quite a climate change. However, it's all to play for, isn't it? And one
Mm,
thing we'll say, we only really sort of touched on it at the beginning, obviously with regards to Juan de Ramos, he was a pragmatist. His style of football was very direct, though, and this Rayo team played in that sort of way where there wasn't there was no passing for passing's sake, and they used the width of the pitch. The wing play was very prominent in terms of, what do you call it? In Spain they use that phrase. They were a very vertical team. I think that's
mm.
probably a good way of explaining how Juan de Ramos set them up at this time and in European competition by having that directness and playing vertically. It gets results, doesn't it?
Yeah, no, it really does, and I think you're absolutely spot on the way that you can, describe Juan de Ramos and in how he approaches this game in particular. Because, Lokomotiv Moscow aren't a European powerhouse, so say, but they are a powerhouse in Russian football. There is a swell of power and particularly finance in Russian football around this time in the two Moscow clubs and Zenit St. Petersburg as well, and there was a real concerted effort from the Russian Federation at the turn of the millennium to go far in Europe, to really show the Russian Premier League as a competitor to the likes of the Premier League, to La Liga, to Serie A, to Liga, and to the Bundesliga, and they invest into that. So when Lokomotiv Moscow come to Vallecas, and let's call a spade here, they were your very stereotypical hard as fuck kind of squad as well, weren't they? When you saw them line up, and I was watching some of the videos back today, you can see sort of like it's like a lineup of just the Monstars or something like that. They're all like really like battle hardened and like looking really angry. Again, I might be stereotyping here, but that's just the way it looked to me. And it
Yeah.
proved to be a really rough game for Rayo Vallecano to play. However, like you say, with that vertical football and with that wing play, they just dominated. It's like it was almost like a dance. The way that they sort of like edged out Lokomotiv Moscow at home. It
Mhm.
was a pretty big achievement at the time to say this is a scalp against a pretty massive club.
Yeah, yeah, it's not the Russian team with no pushovers were very physical, and I think like you say the use of the directness that Rayo have it gets the agility over the physicality, and that proves to be the difference. And I'd say as well from a technical point of view, when you watch some of the movements back from that game, the passing's a lot more crisp from Rayo.
Mm.
It's going to sound like a cliche thing to say, but the technical ability of the Rayo players does seem slightly above the Lokomotiv players, whereas the Lokomotiv players are much better at what you say, putting themselves about. I guess is the is the phrase that we would use in English term, in UK parlance, I guess.
Yeah, it's like that first half in Mean Machine. That's the way I probably would describe it. Where the the prison guards are a bit more fitter and they're a bit more
Yes.
focused, and the Mean Machine just fancy laying one in on people. And again, each their own on that front. It's a different kind of football. And again, you see it in the second leg, and again, going away to Moscow, in the middle of winter or sort of like at least early spring at this point, is no easy feat. It's a long
Yeah.
distance to travel. It is a tough place to go. Ask any European leader from the 19th and 20th centuries how difficult it is to get to Moscow. They'll certainly they'll certainly tell you. And the fact they get a 0-0 result there and you go through to an aggregate is absolutely just like, you know, fantastic for Rayo. And it no longer feels like it's a holiday. It feels like actually we've got as good a chance as anybody to do something here. We belong in this competition, as I said. And then they come up into the round of 16. And again, this is possibly, you know, to the modern listener or to the younger listener, Bordeaux probably feel like a afterthought. At the minute, they are a third tier French club after their administrative relegation. They hadn't really
Yeah.
done too much in the last, dare I say, 15 years in French football at all. But at the turn of the century and in the 2000s, Bordeaux were a force in French football. They were regularly finishing in the top four alongside, Lyon, Paris Saint-Germain, Marseille. They had wonderful, football players like Yuri Gorkoif, who was or Johan Gorkoif,
Gorkov, yeah.
something Gorkov, and things like
Gorkov,
that.
yeah.
Some brilliant players that were coming through the system as well. A young Gabriel Obertan, etc. And again, when we look at the shift of this was the test, wasn't it? This was the test that Rayo Vallecano had on a more level playing field with a like for like team, with a team that do have more pedigree. Let's call a spade, and they go through this with absolutely flying colours. Paul, 4-1 at home, still regarded as one of the best football matches ever played at Vallecas.
Yeah, it drew attention because, and I think this was the game where Rayo earned the what do you call it, moniker of Mata Gigantes, giant killers. It was I think the headline of Marca after the game, but I think it was Marca. It may have been asked, but no, it would have been Marca. Sorry. Essentially, it caught the attention because it was, Rayo were certainly the underdog. Not just because obviously Bordeaux were such a team that was accustomed to playing European football at the time, as you've mentioned, but also because of this is still Rayo, a neighborhood club. A club that had still very much obviously we're at the turn of millennium here, so it's more of it was a 20th century club that was just about to go into the 21st century with very little 21st century elements to it, which some Rayo fans would still argue today that infrastructure-wise, the club is very much still trapped in the 20th century as well. Even, what are we, 25 years later, 26 years later?
Yeah, I don't even think the tickets have changed in that time, and I don't even say that jokingly. I genuinely think, looking at some of the tickets I've seen on Twitter this week of people holding their, much applauded ticket for queuing up and getting it, it very much gives you, as the kids say, it is 2001 coded, as they would put out there.
I think,
so yeah.
you know what? I think if it was an intentional, if it was intended to be a retro club by design, people might appreciate it a bit more, but it's not because of any reason other than neglect. I think it's fair to say underinvestment and outright neglect from president, as you mentioned before. But
Pressa.
Successive regimes have contributed to this situation, I guess, as well. But yes, to get back to the point, the 4-1 win at Vallecas over Bordeaux, really was a statement. This was the game as well where I think it was the performances of Bolo and Bolic that stood out as well. And I can remember around about this era as well that some French clubs tended to have a bit more about them. It wasn't like just nowadays where it's like it's basically PSG flying the flag for Ligue 1 so often in the Champions League, because such is the gap in resources that they have versus the rest of the French league. I remember early 2000s, you had Bordeaux, you had obviously Marseille, you had even, I remember once, was it Metz? They also had a run in what did they play Arsenal in Champions League, or was it Arsenal or United in one of the Champions League games, and it was
Metz play. I think I remember going against Manchester United for Metz. There was obviously RC Lens as well. Nantes had a run in the late 90s in the Champions League as well, went quite far too. So again, in terms of coefficiency, Ligue 1 was always sort of like the third or fourth, or sometimes even dare say second league in Europe in terms of, you look at there was a dominance of Brazil in the international scene. However, the players that were dominating European football at the time were French. You think of, Arsene Wenger's Arsenal side. You were looking at Nicolas Anelka coming through at Real Madrid. You've got Emmanuel Petit. You've got, so many. Zinedine Zidane. So they were the most. The biggest powerhouse of the time, to what Spain have been like more recently in terms of how they are spread across the continent. French players were the Globetrotters at the time, so to speak. And like you say, with Bordeaux were a very successful club in France, especially with its position, in the area on the Atlantic coast, not really surrounded by too many competitors as well. I think the closest massive rival is probably Toulouse, but they were never really too massive a club. So then you're looking maybe a bit further afield to Marseille. I always remember the name of Bordeaux Stadium as well, because it was the best stadium to play at on World Cup '98 for PlayStation 1.
Yes. Yeah.
It was the Stade Chambon-Delmas. And in the second leg, Rayo go to this iconic stadium, and I still remember it on the PS1, where it kind of like rotated as you were picking which stadium where to play at. They go away to Bordeaux, and many people are thinking, we're going to see the same sort of pragmatism from Juan de Ramos once again. We're probably going to see a 1-0 draw here. They don't really need to go and do anything here. They could actually lose this game and still progress, given the dominance that they showed at home with a 4-1 win. No. 2-1 away from home here, Paul, in France. Rayo, we're talking about a statement win here. To not only get that 4-1 at home, but to go away from home and win 2-1 in France was, at this point, people had Euro Rayo on the cards. They were saying, you've got all these wonderful Spanish clubs, doing it, getting through the round of 16, getting to the quarterfinals. 4 out of the 8 sides in the quarterfinals were Spanish teams. It was insane, wasn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. Eye-catching, and shows that it was, they were a team to be taken seriously. Because it wasn't by fluke by any means. It was a hard-earned result, and 6-2 aggregate. If you look, actually, I think I've still got I've got the away for record up here. That is of the what do you call it? Last 16 it is, isn't it? Before the quarters, fourth round. Oh, sorry, I appear to have gone on mute then by accident.
It's all right. Yeah, can you hear me?
Have I froze?
No, I can hear you. You're still moving to me.
There we go. I can hear you now. Yeah.
No worries.
Oh, okay.
42. Let me write that down. 42
Might need to edit that bit out then.
I'll edit that bit out.
Okay. So yeah, I'll start again. Yeah. So having a look back at the quarterfinals, last 16 results as they were. Rayo's 6-2 aggregate is probably only bettered by Barcelona's 6-0 aggregate against AEK Athens. So they were the highest scoring or joint highest scorers of that round. Interesting to note as well, Alaves they beat Inter 5-3. We'll cover, I think, Alaves's European run, because obviously it has a slightly different ending to Rayo's. Not massively different, it's not laden with silverware, but it's still one of significant note, and so we'll come back to that. But it shows how well Spanish sides were able to show their class against opposition from other European countries, I think, by the number of goals scored in the last 16.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think even to this day, it is scandalous that all the Spanish sides got drawn against each other in the quarterfinals, which obviously reduces your chance of having an all-Spanish semi-final by half.
Well, yeah. I mean, put it this way. You had 4 Spanish sides that made it through to the quarters, and, they got drawn against each other.
Shocking, isn't it? You shouldn't. I know there is a rule.
Balls.
Yeah, there is a rule nowadays where you can't draw, or certainly there was in the Champions League when it was the Champions League that we know it, that you couldn't draw a team from your home country up until a certain point in the competition. And maybe it was the quarterfinals where that rule sort of went out the window. But yeah, it is a shame that all 4 of them ended up playing people from home, and you end up losing 2, obviously, naturally through knockouts. And this is where the story does end for Rayo. And again, I don't want to obviously come up with an excuse for it. because it's not a collapse. It's not a matter of them falling over, because they do get a result in the um, in the first leg at home. I think it was 2-1 if I remember rightly. But then they go up to Victoria, to the I think it at the time was the Mentirosa, um, and it just doesn't happen for them. Deportivo Alaves again having a wonderful season, as you've just mentioned, beating Inter Milan. They've had a great campaign themselves in the UEFA Cup, and it just becomes these two basically rocks coming together, and one of them's got to win. And it was Alaves who, in that second leg, just absolutely dominated and put Rayo to the sword. And they would go on to reach the final, as we've discussed, and I'm sure we'll do an episode on them reaching the final against Liverpool. But essentially, it's not a disappointment for Rayo to get this far and to fall at this hurdle to somebody from back home. It is a statement of where they were as a club, weren't they?
Yeah, that's the key thing. I mean, to be fair, it was the 3-0 loss was the first leg at Mendizorroza, actually.
Beg your pardon.
Yeah, but
a hill to climb.
So,
then is the other side of the story.
Yeah, that's the thing. And then in Vallecas, obviously, Rayo were playing with a mountain to climb, but nothing to lose. So they do put up a fight, but it's just the wind's knocked out the sail by Jordi Cruyff, I think it is. Yeah, it's Jordi Cruyff who gets the Alaves goal, which takes a bit of momentum out. But Rayo were pushing.
Well, at that point, they then got to get not obviously just an equaliser to make it 4-4, but they've got to go and get the win, as we were talking about the way goals were, weren't we?
See, this is all comes full circle, and about how cruel that rule was, but actually it should be brought back. I mean, I actually think that the game that we saw the other night, Bayern Munich versus PSG, now that I've had the chance to see it, I think it was a fantastic game, and I wouldn't want us to have away goals back anytime soon. But that's another matter. So yes, Rayo's UEFA Cup run comes to an end against fellow La Liga side in Deportivo Alaves. 4-2 aggregate. But it was a successful campaign in the sense that people now know who Rayo Vallecano were, and it was there was no shame in losing to a team that would eventually go on to reach the final and lose narrowly, in the narrowest of ways, golden goal after a 4-4 game to Liverpool.
Golden goal as well. Honestly, we're bringing back all the hits in this episode as well, aren't we?
This UEFA Cup run had everything, didn't it? It had away goals, golden goal, high scoring, all Spanish sides being drawn against each other in the quarterfinals, some upsets.
Do you know what we should do for that game? For the Deportivo Alaves game, we should do a watch back of it, and just and clip it up, obviously, because I'm sure people don't have 2 hours to listen to us talk rewatching a game of football golden goal in it. But it'd be good to do like a watch back of that match, because it was absolutely sensational. And I think the thing that comes out for Rayo here is, it's obviously the pride that they have of getting so far into this competition, and it's not about, establishing a dynasty. It's not about, right, well, we've now got to qualify for Europe every year. It's about enjoying it in the moment. It's about those players getting to play European football for the first time. It is under the lights at Vallecas in European football, hearing that chant and that anthem going out as the players line up at the beginning of the match, the fans getting something they've never experienced before. And these are, as we've mentioned several times in this episode and in previous episodes, some of the most passionate, most ardent, most weathered fans in terms of what they have to, the shit they got to live with. So to be able to go through this experience, back in 2001 was brilliant. The fact that they're reliving it now is also fantastic. And I know as we were, recording this episode, I think it was still 0-0 at the time. I'm not too sure what the score is now, but they're in that first leg against, again, French opposition, this time in the form of Strasbourg.
Yeah,
You know, and how things change as well, because Strasbourg are also, if we were looking this in the cold light of day, not your usual, European trophy semi-finalist, but then you peel back behind, the big green curtain in Ozzy's castle, and you find out it's actually owned by Blueco, who own Chelsea, and they're filled with, a load of basically Chelsea feeder teams, and Ben Chilwell and Gary O'Neill's there as well. So it's not as good a
yeah, it's
story
not
as
so
Rayo is.
romantic that sense
No.
from a Strasbourg point of view. I can tell you it ended 1-0 to Rayo in the first leg. I think by the time this episode goes out, we'll probably already know Rayo's fate, or the listener will. But yeah, the point we wanted to make was that this game, Rayo v Strasbourg, was no way in hell was it the the debut of Rayo in a European competition at such a late stage of the competition. They've been there before in arguably a more prestigious competition, I would say. Although I
Yeah,
suppose if you asked a Rayo fan today, would you rather be, what means more, making it to Leipzig for the Europa Conference League final, or your memories of a UEFA Cup game against Alaves in which you lose on aggregate? I think they probably would pick game against Strasbourg on recency bias, surely.
yeah, you'd like to think so. And I remember when I spoke to Paul Reedy about this, he had already booked his hotel room in Leipzig as well. So he sort of looked. I'm trying to remember who is in the other side of the semi-final, but it's eluding me at the moment. But like you say, this is a great opportunity for them to go and get to a European final, which again doesn't happen, any any time of anybody's history. It's a very unique thing. So if they can do it
Yeah,
and they can win it, obviously that will be absolutely fantastic, and it's a wonderful competition to win in terms of next season. Despite having a tough season where they've spent more of it looking over their shoulder than they have looking towards the top of the table, they'll go into the Europa League with a chance to compete there as well. So again, another European event would come off the back of it. And we obviously wish them the best, but we just want people to know that they have pedigree already. They've been here, they've done it, they've shown that they can compete at a European level. They're doing it again right now. They're 1-0 going into the second leg against Strasbourg, and we wish them the very best of luck in that, don't we, Paul?
we do.
And yeah, and it's such a fascinating club and story. So definitely, if you're gonna put your support behind anybody in Europe this season, pick Rayo, cheer them on to Leipzig, and cheer them on hopefully to some silverware, because it's going to be a brilliant story.
Absolutely, and it is the winner of Shakhtar v Crystal Palace that will play, and nothing against Crystal Palace. I'd rather Rayo win any day of the week.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There could be an argument to say that maybe we should, cheer on Shakhtar, given the war in Ukraine and things like that. However, this is not
Yeah,
El Partido or Da Partido. I don't know what Partido is in Ukrainian. But we obviously
yeah,
want Rayo to win it, don't we?
yeah. We've got our La Liga bias. That's
Yes.
the only bias we have, is that we really
Yeah.
appreciate Spanish football.
And hopefully in 25 years' time, there are some younger people than us talking about Rayo reaching the Conference League final in such nostalgic ways like we are now. That'd
Yes,
be beautiful symmetry, which we can definitely celebrate here on this podcast. Or who knows, Paul, and I'm not tying you down to a long-term contract, but it could be us talking about it that way. Who knows? Well
yeah.
into our 60s, still doing El Partido. Yeah, let's leave it there, that one there. But thank you so much for joining me in what feels like an emergency podcast to restore the timeline of
Yes.
Spanish football.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure as always, Nick. Felt like we needed to do this.
Yeah, it felt like a vent more than anything. I feel like there's been a lot more underlying tension than our usual jovial
Yeah,
wanders and
there was
meanders
definitely
down.
there's definitely been a different tone to this episode that I'm sure if you're listening to it will be very apparent. And I think as well I've done something that I don't usually do mid-episode. I've gone and I've fact checked it was Juan de Ramos's managerial career, which normally I rely on the knowledge and passion and memories that I have, and a few notes that I make to myself, like, beforehand. There was a couple of odd tangents as you normally expect. So this episode, it might not be what you're usually expecting to hear from us, but it was one that we felt we needed to get out of our system.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely, and hopefully, like you say, fingers crossed. By the time that this comes out, we do have Rayo in a European final, so we'll still be relevant by the time we come around to talk about that. If you want to hear some more content from us as well, we've got some fantastic episodes in our back catalogue or in the archive, as we'll start to refer it to. If you are listening to this one now, it means you can access last week's episode with Miguel Pereira, where we talked about the never-ending story of Real Madrid. And if you're looking ahead for our next episode already, very, very keen, aren't you? However, we are going to be speaking to David Arrowsmith, author of Narco Ball and Killing Maradona, his new book coming out in May, all about Narco Ball being the influence of Pablo Escobar and the Medellin cartels on Colombian football, not just at a club level, but an international level, missing out on the 1986 World Cup, which, everyone's talking about the 1986 World Cup in Mexico at the moment, but hello, did you know that it wasn't supposed to be there, etc., etc.? And also Killing Maradona, obviously a player who we know well from his time in Spain with Barcelona, and then coming back to Sevilla after his drug ban. I'm sure we're going to get into those stories as well, so definitely one to look forward to. But for now, I'll say thank you very much for listening to you guys at home. Gracias as always, and we'll make sure to see you later. Hasta luego.